Another thing we talk about internally is triple win. If we win, client wins, audience wins, then we're good. Bad sponsored content, the audience doesn't win, and that's why people hate it.
So today I'm joined by Nick Routley, and he's based in Vancouver, same as me. He's a designer and creative director, but he's turned managing editor of Visual Capitalist. And they've got close to 250,000 subscribers. They're one of the fastest growing online publishers globally, and they're focused on topics including markets, technology, energy, and the global economy. So keep listening to today's podcast to learn how to make beautiful, shareable, and engaging content. Hey Nick, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Ben. Excited to chat with you today.
Cool. Well, and it's always great to have someone from Vancouver. This does not happen very often. So take us back to the beginning, though. How you tell us a bit about the story of how you went from being a designer to being involved in Visual Capitalist, which probably many people might have seen or encountered some of your work somewhere, but not realized it. But how did you go from being a designer to a managing editor? How did that happen?
Yeah, thanks. Good question. It's interesting. We never really expected to, or I never really expected to be in the position that I and we are now. It really just started out as an idea to, at the time, take companies' information that wasn't being presented very well and just make that a little bit easier for people to understand. And I mean, in the beginning, so the history of this goes, I've been with Visual Capitalist right from the start. So I was employee number one, I think in 2011 or 12 now. So it was quite a while ago. But it was a very different business model back then. We were more of a design agency, design marketing style agency, service provider. And our main goal was to just find better ways for companies to communicate with investors. A lot of them were still doing it quite badly, to be frank. And we were just looking for ways to improve on that. And especially with businesses that are very data heavy, using a visual approach is the way to go often. And there's a lot more avenues to get creative when you're doing that kind of thing. So that's how that started.
Yes. Tell us, for those people who aren't familiar with Visual Capitalist, from an outsider, I mean, I'd say what you guys are creating are incredible infographics. But yeah, how did you get into the world of infographics and creating these data-driven visual design pieces? Because, I mean, you said you started off as an agency that kind of morphed into this as a business need, where you saw people weren't very good at presenting data. But yeah, how did you get into that? Because it's super specialized.
It is, yeah. So I did kind of a career change, a little bit older than most people did. I was around 30, which I guess isn't that old, but it is a little bit old to pivot careers completely, which is what I did, into design. And right away, as I was doing design, I had just graduated in 2010, 2011, around the time that happened. And right away, I started diving into more data-oriented design stuff. So here in Vancouver, I was collaborating. I was creating content for places like Van City Buzz at the time, or Vancouver's Awesome, or anywhere that was kind of like a media company that was willing to take my data-driven designs and put them up. Then I would pitch those over to them, right? And that caught the attention of our founder, Jeff, who was looking to get into using more of an infographic approach to talk about things. So we had that conversation, and that's how I linked up with him to do this. And so, yeah, infographics at the time were a real fad, right? I mean, if anyone's been around for a while, around 2011, there was an infographic for everything. So you could go on, visually, like visual.ly, that was the place to go look at amazing infographics. So, getting your infographic on there was, you'd get, thousands and thousands of views on it. Or, anybody's social media feed was full of all kinds of infographics as well. So it was a real fad. We tried not to approach it from the perspective of it being a fad. We took it really seriously. I looked at the history of infographics and data visualization and tried to look at the fundamentals of why this stuff was interesting. How did these infographics actually help people retain information? Why are they better? In what instances are they better? Because they're not always better, right? So we really tried to look at all that stuff. and apply, use it in the real business sense, right? And so that's how that started.
Yeah. And so, I mean, tell us about what you're trying to build, like as a company. What gets you out of bed? What's your why?
Yeah, good question. Really, it's about finding a better way for people to learn about how the world works, and that's what Visual Capitalist is at the heart of it. There's a clear focus on the economy and on investing and on business. That's just sort of where our roots are, and what we think is important. And helping people understand the world through that lens is where we're at. And that's also from the angle of sophisticated investors, of course, and people and decision makers and people who are trying to turn their money into more money. But it's also people who are just looking, maybe in the beginning of their career, maybe you're even in high school or something, and you're trying to learn about how the world works, or you're, in a developing economy where you don't have access to great education and things like that. So this is also a gateway for those people to learn about the world as well, especially the world of money and the economy and how that all plugs in together, because it's really complicated. So,
And so, how do you see this kind of fitting in with the challenges with modern media that I guess you're trying to solve? Because I mean, and particularly with, I guess, fake news. I don't know what other problems you see out there, but I mean, it's very fractious. There's a lot of opinion. There's a lot of conspiracy.
yeah.
How do you see, and what do you see your role in that kind of, I guess, macro media? I haven't heard of them for a while, but the macro media landscape.
Mhm.
How do you kind of fit into that, and how do you see your kind of role and responsibility?
Yeah, that's a tricky one. So we're recording this right now in the wake of the US election right now, which is really ground zero for everything that's wrong with media. If you're looking for a case of what's going on, like that's the time to look at it. Um, and really, man, media. So we were having a I'm like, I don't even know where to start with this because there's so much. But we were having a conversation the other day about the tactics that media companies resort to now, and particularly because we're in a whole different world now. We don't need media in the same way that we needed media in like the 1980s, for example. Like, I don't need a newspaper to come tell me what's going on. We all have a smartphone. We all have access to social media. In some cases, we know about stuff at the exact same time as people who are reporters or decision makers, right? So in that sense, um, we don't need media as much, right? And so a lot of these companies are are sort of burning the goodwill that they had with people that they built up over, even over a century, right? Because because of ad dollars, right? And so they make all kinds of weird decisions around that, whether that's clickbait, whether that's emotionally charged or really biased news, and they're slowly burning through all their goodwill, and so that creates an opportunity for people like us who don't have a century and a half of reputation to come in and go, we're going to do things that aren't biased, we're going to do things that are data driven to allow people to make their own decisions, and that's our goal really, is to find the gap that all these media companies are leaving and just run right through that, um, and that's really the big goal.
And how do you see media consumption changing and evolving, and how are you like pivoting around that?
Yeah, media consumption. COVID-19 is the perfect catalyst for accelerating what's going on with media consumption. People were already going really leaning hard into more mobile consumption. Like, people still sit at their computer at work the way you and I are right now. We're in front of probably a desktop computer. People still do that. Our core audience, especially, still does that. There's people who work on Wall Street and stuff. They're sitting in front of a computer and they consume content that way, which is fine. And people will probably continue to do that, and they are now. And so right now, our content is really optimized towards that. But also, people are online all the time. And when the people are online all the time, they're consuming things in different contexts. So it's not just the device. It's not just this computer here. It's not just the phone people are using when they're commuting or sitting on the couch or whatever it is. It's also the context people are in. So we're trying to plan around okay, so right now we win when people are at work and they go, cool, what did Visual Capitalist put out today? Or, oh, I saw this in my Twitter feed. This is interesting, you know? So, or someone forwarded this to me. So that's how we win right now. But there are a whole bunch of other moments in the day where people are doing other stuff, like looking at Instagram or, you know, or on Reddit or whatever it is. And you want to win in those situations too, right? Especially if you feel like the stuff that you're putting out has utility and makes people's lives better, then how do we get in that conversation a lot more? And that's our focus going forward.
And yeah, and tell me about that. How, like, what's your strategy there? How have you historically built out your audience, and yeah, and how do you see that evolving?
Yeah, so historically we've been very lucky and strategic to mostly build our audience through organic. It builds organically. So almost 100% of our focus goes into making really good content. And so if the content, like if you yourself or anybody listening thinks about the way that you share things with people, and like I don't mean performative sharing either, like LinkedIn, where it's like, oh, look at this article, you know, it's not that kind of stuff, but like the things you forward to your friends or colleagues or something, like you send it to someone in Slack or you send it in WhatsApp or, you know, you forward the email to somebody, you know, that kind of sharing, that means something's good, right? And that's the sort of stuff we focus on is how do we make something that's so interesting that people just genuinely want to share it because they think it's cool or that they think people can learn from it. And when you're doing that and people and you're creating those sharing points, then you can't help but grow, I feel like. And so that's really what we've been able to do. Um, and that's probably what we'll continue focusing on. But the other part of it too is like going forward, how do we continue that momentum, right? And internally we talk about something called scaling up, scaling down. And what that means is, okay, so if you take a thing that you think is people want to know about that's worth people understanding or knowing, like let's call it a concept or something like that, how do you take that concept and use it in a way that works in all the different contexts we were talking about before, right? So the person sitting down focusing doing research at their computer gets the big version of the concept, right? They get the fully formed version, but the person on their way home on the SkyTrain or on the, you know, looking at their phone while they're waiting in line at the grocery store or something like that, they get a different version of that same concept that's a bit more scaled down, that's a bit more accessible, right? And so that's another approach we're taking too, is thinking about the context people are viewing things and going, like, what's the serving of this thing? Do they get the entree or do they get the snack? You know, so that's another way we're trying to win as well.
Yeah, that's cool. And so, as I mean, you're now thinking about, okay, well, how can we redistribute or slice and dice content to make it applicable to different contexts? Um, and you talk about this focus on really compelling content. How focused are you on the, like, how do you decide what to create a data visualization about? I know some of it is driven by what people will pay you to produce um, because they're your clients essentially.
Yeah,
What drives your editorial strategy? Because I'm guessing there's a kind of a blend between editorial strategy, stuff that you want to create anyway, and then there's a overlap with, okay, well, what are people willing to pay for you to produce? So
yeah.
how does that dynamic work, particularly in context with, you know, you don't just want to produce crap content just because someone's paying for it, because that's not going to help your brand. So how have you kind of
Correct. Yeah.
danced between those two things?
No, that's a really good question, and getting into the business of this, I think, is interesting for people, because we all really get a lot of questions on our business model, and people don't understand. But you're right. There's definitely a spectrum, right? There's the things that we want to talk about that are like even experimental that we're not even sure the audience is going to like. So there's that whole side of things, and then there's client-driven content that we know is basically a slam dunk. Like people want to know about wealth and how to build it, or want to know, you know, about certain things about the markets or something, and that in turn for a client that is like one of the stock markets or one of the major banks or something, that for them is a really easy proposition, right? But yeah, in terms of the awkward middle where there's sort of an editorial and client thing happening, we in the past in the world of infographics, there was an expectation that most infographics were sponsored. So we didn't really have as much of that awkward tension as like an older legacy media brand, right? Where I don't know, sponsored content is a lot more awkward if you're a tried and true journalism outlet or something, right? But for one, we've had, infographics were always sort of sponsored, so it was kind of the expectation. The other thing is we were always focused on a business and investing audience, and they just get how things work. So if something's sponsored once in a while, they go, okay, well, these guys need to make money. So this is sort of how things work. And as long as they trust the source, then it's okay, right? And that's why we place a lot of focus on making sure that we get things right and that we're not biased and that we're respecting the audience, right? Another thing we talk about internally is triple win. If we win, the client wins, audience wins, then we're good. Bad sponsored content, the audience doesn't win, and that's why people hate it. But the really great thing for people who come to Visual Capitalist for information is that we are often able to work with companies that have a wealth of information that isn't publicly accessible. So if we can make smart decisions around taking that data in a way that also works for the client to get mind share with people and stuff like that, then that works really well, right? Because we've taken information that wasn't previously available and we've unlocked it for people to learn from. And so as long as we do that thoughtfully, then that's how that sort of thing works.
Cool. And so, I mean, tell us, can you explain how you exist? Let's dive into the monetization a bit deeper. So
Sure.
You churn out data visualizations all the time. Some of them are sponsored. Is that the business model? Is that how it works? Or can you explain it in a bit more detail?
Yeah, totally. So we actually, most of our revenue comes from sponsored content, and it's all very clearly marked sponsored content. So there's nothing weird happening there. We work with companies, particularly these days, we're working with larger companies on fairly large campaigns. So there'll be sponsored content over time. If you remember, Vice has all kinds of channels. A lot of those are like the Creators Project was kind of the prototypical sponsored channel back in the day. We have channels as well. Some of them have a sponsor. It allows us to create stuff for people. So that's another avenue. If we have a particularly big deal, we'll do some other things. There'll be some display advertising on the site. We do that internally though. We have a section on the site that has purely sponsored infographics where people can learn about investment opportunities. So that it's all within the context of Visual Capitalist though, and the site and our platform and our email list too, I should say too, because that's a particularly good avenue.
So is most of your content consumed on your website? Like the data visualizations?
Yeah, I would say for the most part, most of it is. There are some social media channels where where people can consume it a little bit more. Facebook is not a great place for that, so we just linked it right to the site because it's kind of awkward. Twitter, we can kind of get away with doing threads and things like that, and Instagram we'll make more bite-sized stuff, but most of it's on the site. The only exception to that would be when it's syndicated through other media outlets if they pick things up. And certain things we'll design to be read in the email, but still usually you can click through the site.
So yeah, talking about your subscribers, because you've got nearly 250,000 subscribers. What has been your strategy beyond just creating great content that people like to share? Has there been anything else? I mean, how have you driven up that number of subscribers? Has that been deliberate, intentional? Any tactics that have worked or not worked?
Yeah, and I would say that it's been a work in progress, right? So we've had that list for a long time, and it's been growing. It's growing faster all the time. We've got good annual growth on that, but really, it's been about. I mean, we have a pop-up on the site. There are places on the site where people can go to sign up, but like we make that pretty easy for people. Aside from that, we have done some light advertising for signups. Like, I mean, we have done a little bit of Facebook advertising to get people interested in the site that way. But we haven't really done anything we haven't done anything that I would say is like an interesting strategy because we just haven't really had to get that creative with it. To be honest, we put all our mind up, share into the content. So
Yeah, so going back then to day one, because maybe we can unpick this a bit. So you were a
yeah,
design consultancy who decided to become like data visualization publishers, a media
hmm
company. How did that happen? Because
yeah,
for the first few, I don't know how many data visualizations you've produced over the years, but it takes time for people to realize, oh, I can go to Visual Capitalist and check out some
yeah.
cool new visualizations. So that process of audience acquisition or building must have been intentional to some degree. Can you tell us about those early days and how did you get your first visitors and kind of visibility and turned that enabled you to then turn your audience into subscribers?
Sure. Yeah, I can walk through the history of that, and it is somewhat interesting actually. I would say that in the beginning it was not intentional. We're in the enviable position of having we've been able to let the audience tell us what they want, and we've sort of followed, right? So in the early days, we like as a design driven agency, we had a portfolio, and that portfolio had a lot of infographics on it. And as we made more, there were an increasing number of infographics on them. And there was one day where our founder Jeff was checking the site, and he was about to get on a flight, and he looked and the site was down, and he was like, "What is going on? Why is our site down?" And so he looked, and we got one of our pieces got picked up by a site called Zero Hedge, if you know that one. That's like a kind of a niche financial site, but they do have a lot of traffic though. And so when that got posted up, it just completely killed our site because it was not built for any sort of scale at the time, right? Hosting company. And so yeah, we finally figured out what happened, and we started looking at analytics on the site because we weren't that focused on the analytics on the site. It was mainly just as a tool to show people, hey, here's our work, right? But we started to see the traffic really had been going up on a lot of these pieces, and people were visiting the portfolio to look at infographics, which is not really something that we had anticipated at the time. And so you know, Jeff was thinking, hey, maybe there's a way that we can just make this a more friendly environment for people to come visit and look at infographics. And so that's sort of the kernel of how things started to pivot towards a media model. Um, we thought, hey, let's publish something once a day and just see how that goes, you know. And so we still do publish that main thing once every day. We publish more things in various capacities, but that's still a strategy that remains to this day. And over the years, the articles got more, they got bigger, they got more robust, I would say. They got more. Our team grew. Obviously, we have more talented people than we ever were. So you know, it really evolved over time, and it's funny, you take a thing seriously and you do it well, and you do it consistently, and eventually it becomes what you want it to become, right? And over time people have asked us for certain things, and we've done it. People kept asking us for a book. Okay, we'll make a book. Now we're on book number 2, which just got launched today actually. So and you know, people ask for certain things and we deliver, and I just feel like if the audience is telling you they want a thing and you find a way to make that work monetarily, then you go for it, right? And that's really how that all happened.
That's cool. And can you talk us through your process, like how you actually produce content? As
Sure.
because I find it a bit bewildering when I like see a data visualization that you guys produce, and I'm like, wow, how do you get from a spreadsheet, or I don't know what you use, but I'm guessing there's data in there somewhere, and then
Yeah.
there's translating that data into a design. There's math involved because you're calculating things as well.
Right.
Um, can you just talk us through the process of creating a data visualization, um, the strategy around what to visualize, and then the nuts and bolts of how it's actually produced?
Yeah, absolutely. I can walk you through kind of how the process works. So we have regular meetings. So there are a couple sides of the business. There are two main sides of the business, I'll say, that from the content perspective. There's the editorial side, editorial research, and there's the creative side, which is, you know, it's like Law and Order. They work together to do the thing. And really, we will sit around and go, A, what's happening this week, like what's newsworthy, but also like what reports are coming out, um, what trends are happening that we haven't covered a lot lately. What have people been asking us for? Because we do have a really robust pipeline of audience suggestions, and we take that seriously. So people keep giving them to us. So we'll look at all that stuff and go, what's a good opportunity for things that we're going to do over the next week or two, and we'll talk about that as a team. We'll do some red team type stuff, which is trying to poke holes in the argument, or trying to look at it from different angles, and so once we have our core ideas, then those go and get into the research phase, and we go, what's the best way to turn this into something that people can understand the data and the concepts really in a visual way. Then the editorial team and the design team will kind of work together a little bit to figure out how that's going to work, and the designers work their magic with the data. That's a tricky one because there's no real silver bullet there. It's really about just having experience working with this stuff. I mean, luckily we do have people that have been doing this for, like, I've been doing it for about a decade, but there are people on the team who've been doing this for a few years as well now. So some of the newer people on the team, they all work together to just learn the ropes, and we have different strategies around doing this. And once you build up the processes, and we made a lot of mistakes over the years too, and made a lot of really terrible infographics as well, right? So you have to learn that way too. Like, if you ever encounter anything on our site that goes back to 2012 or something, it's probably not going to be great, So you learn over the years as well.
Yeah, and so as you're creating, because what's been really strong as we've been talking about this is the editorial focus that you guys have got in terms of creating really high quality content, and that intrinsic in high quality content is the propensity to be more engaging, shareable. But within the process itself, do you have like checks and balances in place to evaluate, hey, is this a go, no go? Is this working? How do you evaluate, or what are your kind of criteria for, is this going to be shareable? Is this going to be engaging? Is this right? Or is it just a kind of creative director nod that good enough?
Mm-hmm. It's a little bit of that. I mean, so Jeff, our founder, is still very involved in the content process because he initially was the person who was thinking of all the content in the beginning, and his instincts for it are dead on. So even if we have quick conversations around it, it's super helpful. I mean, I've been doing this for about a decade as well, so I also work on that process of approving things, and then we also try and foster a culture of being really critical, and really being transparent and open with our feedback. So really, if everybody on the team has the license to look at things critically and be honest about whether a thing is working or not, then that's how the content gets better, right? Particularly when you have like a lot of folks on our team are from different parts of the world, or they have different life experiences and stuff like that. So we can really look at things from a bunch of different angles. And I think that's helpful at coming to the best version of the idea if it's been stress tested a whole bunch of times before it even goes out. Plus, our audience takes this stuff really seriously, as they should. I mean, there's key decision makers, there's people with a lot of money on the line. If you make a mistake, you're going to hear about it. If you shift too far one way in the bias zone, you're going to hear about it. And so our audience keeps us honest, and we know that if our standards start to slip, then they're just not going to let us off the hook for that. So that's been helpful as well.
And so, I mean, this sounds like quite a big process. How much does it cost to produce a piece, a data visualization?
Yeah, it depends. Like, so usually an individual data viz at this point, or an infographic or whatever it is, will be part of a larger package. But I mean, even a few years ago, a one-off infographic would still be a few $1,000s, just because it takes so much time to research, so much time to design, obviously, and yeah, for a big infographic, probably a good I don't know, 12 hours of research and writing and editing and that kind of thing. And probably also, yeah, a good, 24 to 32 hours of design time probably to go into it. If it's a company that has to go through compliance, for example, that adds more. There's always revisions that come with that. Um, yeah, plus any maybe marketing materials that go around it, or yeah. So it takes quite a while.
Yeah, so we're like
For
40 to 60 hours upwards of that for producing a piece of content.
Yeah, when you see like a long form infographic, those take quite a while. They're a lot of work. So we really, when we do that, we don't do that as much these days, just because that's not really the direction things are moving as much. But when we do it, we try and make it good. And so yeah, they take a while.
And then, I mean, you talk about producing them in terms of packages and stuff, but do you, on an
Mhm.
infographic basis, calculate ROI based on eyeballs that you get on it, how much you get paid for it? What are your metrics for evaluating the success or failure of content that you produce?
Yeah, that's a good question. There are a few. It really depends on the objectives of the client. If it's our own piece, then we have different ways of talking about that. You can look at it from like a qualitative and quantitative aspect, right? So the quantitative aspect would be something like, okay, well, if the company is looking for an action, then have we driven that action, right? Whether they're looking for investment leads, whether they're looking for people to buy bullion or people to, um, download a thing, those are all things we can quantify, right? And if enough people have done that, then we've done our job and we're happy, right? If it's more of a thought leadership type thing, then we go, okay, well, what are the views like? What's the referral traffic coming in like? Um, which media outlets have picked this up? So there's that aspect of it as well. And then on the qualitative side, we're looking at, have people been leaving comments about it? Do they like it? Are people forwarding it and sharing it? And like, what way are they doing that? I really try and pay attention to the qualitative side of it too, because I think there's a lot to learn if you take the time to dig into comment sections, or if it's been posted on Reddit or something, see what people are saying, or Zero Hedge, or, you know what I mean. You can learn a lot from that. So that's sort of, we can evaluate it a bunch of different ways, but yeah, those are the angles I approach it from anyway.
And in terms of like the virality of the content that you produce, is there anything that you've found that has been particularly effective or successful in making a piece of content shareable, or making, like, what are the key attributes that make something really good and shareable?
Yeah, good question there. So it's a tricky one, and we're always trying to figure out the answer to that. But one easy thing that we do is we pay attention to how things look, as people encounter them, right? How are people seeing this? They're seeing it in the social media feed, or what does that preview image look like? What does that headline look like? Um, is is the piece of content something? Have we framed it in a way that's more universal? Have we framed it in a way that is something that people around the world can get interested in? If we're looking at things that really are going to get a lot of tread, it's things like, comparing every country's, trade or something like that. Like, everybody in the world wants to know where their country is standing, so you look at something like that. Um, Usually, being able to see the whole idea in one spot is another way, that is another attribute that makes a thing go more viral, if you will, or spread more. If it's a compact unit, it's like a meme or something, in a way. You see the whole thing and you're like, that's cool. I learned something from that. Easy to share it. Those are the types of things that typically really get a lot of tread.
Cool. Yeah,
Um,
so relevant, personal relevance, and
Personal relevance,
the
yeah,
ability to consume it in a without scrolling, I guess, maybe, because I saw some like
yeah,
the most popular ones that you have, like price of a pint of beer. You can buy this as a poster if you're looking for
yeah,
to be able to compare the price of beer around the world. Um, I mean, it was just, it's a single view. There was another one about um, I mean, different countries comparing, and where you have the ability to go and
Yeah.
find your country. So it's a bit of like, where's Wally or where's Waldo? Um,
Yeah.
and then you find a bit of information that's relevant to you. So there's a hide and seek kind of component.
Yeah, and there's also I mean, hitting a topic at the right moment is really key as well. Um, and like being thoughtful about like, okay, so circling back to problems with media, one of the big things that happens in the modern media landscape is everyone is like kids playing soccer, right? They're all chasing the same ball all the time. And when you have that kind of tunnel vision, you go, it's like a curse of knowledge kind of thing. You just assume everybody knows everything about it, and I think like people in that industry, like I'm in that industry too, you just get so consumed with everything that you're paying attention to all day that you just think you know the universal truth about a thing, right? And really, sometimes coming into things with a bit of a beginner's mindset is the way to go, right? One thing that really got a lot of spread earlier this year for us was the history of pandemics, and that really sprang from a question that I had, which was, um, how does COVID-19 in its early days, like how does this even compare to previous pandemics? Like I don't know how many people, how big were these other ones? Who knows? And I didn't really find a satisfying answer looking online. So maybe this is something we should create, right? And it took quite a bit of work, but it's things like that. Like other people probably have that same question you do, and that's really at the heart of it as well.
Yeah. And so I'm curious how you make all this happen. I mean, an infographic that's like taking 60 to 80 hours to produce. You're doing this every day. How big is your team? How has that kind of evolved over time?
Yeah, our team now is we're around 35 people, I want to say, and over time, yeah, the last couple of years is when we've really scaled up the size of our team. 2 years ago, I can't remember quite how big our team would have been, but it would have been about half that size. Yeah, and so a lot of that is between the editorial and creative side, and there's also some folks on the business development and marketing and a bunch of different like account management and all that stuff as well. So and how do we make it happen? I don't know. Honestly, Ben, it's pretty hard. But and so we've been bootstrapped pretty much right from the start. So we don't have, you know, we don't have a wealth of resources at our disposal to keep growing. So we try and stay scrappy. We focus on things that we know our audience is going to like, and there's we can't just pursue every idea that's kind of thrown at us, right? We have to be really selective and just be consistent and be ruthlessly efficient with things, and that's how we just keep going forward. And yeah, sometimes it can be a lot, but we make it work.
And of these, as you've kind of grown the team and had to operationalize different aspects of the process,
Yeah.
where have you been able to create process and operationalize things, and where's it still kind of grunt work?
Hmm. Yeah, so a lot of so like okay, the reason I'm a little bit wary about, we love operationalizing like process, we like building process around things because that's where we don't want to be spending our mental energy thinking about like processes and organizing projects and things like that. So we're always trying to make that process better. um, I'm also wary about design is tricky, right? There are ways that you can over systematize things. There are there are outlets I won't name, or there are companies I won't name that have like a very standardized template process to displaying data that are pretty popular. But I don't think that's not our bag. We don't do that, and so there'll always kind of be that tricky element which I think is the human element really, where we want to be creative and we want people to have fun making this stuff even, right? So anything we can do to free up time to allow that to happen, that's where we're operationalizing.
Yeah. Can you share, like, over the course of the past, I guess, decade, what have been some of your biggest screw ups or some of the biggest challenges that you've had to deal with?
Yeah, I mean, we've screwed up a lot. I think we're lucky in that we haven't had a lot of really public screw ups. Like we're pretty careful with our content. Occasionally things go wrong though. I mean, we've published things that have had backlash. I mean, there was one I can think of a couple of years ago that We didn't make it, but we published it. It was one on how people can build wealth on minimum wage. And it's interesting because it actually did have some really sound advice in it for people to make some like, obviously it's hard living off minimum wage, especially like in the States, right? But it had some techniques for people to try and put some wealth away. But I mean, for an organization called Visual Capitalist to publish a thing like that, once certain people get a hold of that, I mean, you're just the easiest punching bag in the world. So, making better decisions about content like that, and reading the room a little bit better, are things we've had to learn over time. Figuring out when to just stay in our lane and when not to. It's things like that. So we've had screw ups like that in the past, and it's usually a result of us like having a bit of tunnel vision where we're going, oh, this is great, but not thinking about other perspectives people might have. So.
And what's tough for you at the moment? What are some of the biggest challenges that you're dealing with in growing the business? And what's tough?
Yeah, the tough thing is scaling in a way that's smart. I think, like, especially during COVID times where everything is kind of in disarray a little bit. It's I don't know. We're still feeling things out a little bit. There are certain aspects of our business that I'll say we know we're going to scale and that we're putting resources into. And there are other things that we still are a bit experimental about and that we still need to figure out. And that's really the biggest challenge is managing the complexity of what we're doing every day, and just trying to produce the best content possible with what we've got at the moment. So
what are some of the things on your roadmap? What are some of the things that you'll be working on over the next year or so?
Yeah, so right now, right at the present moment, I mean, we're the tail end of our book process. It exists now, so that's going out to the world. Like, there's a marketing strategy around that. Obviously, we have a licensing product coming up. We had a lot of questions about places wanting to use our content in various ways. Right now, anybody can grab anything off the site and just use it for free. Totally fine with attribution, and it'll always be that way. But increasingly, as we have a more global audience, we have places that want to translate things, for example, or other media outlets that just want to take things and switch it around to their format or something, right? And we don't have time to honor all those requests, and we don't have the resources either to modify things for people. So this is just an easy avenue for people to just pay a little bit, take the design files, do what they need to do with it, and that's fine. So that's another product that we have that we're building out right now. And we also have a different section of the site that's still very experimental, but we're also building that out as well. And that's sort of going to the scaling up, scaling down thing, where this is like a more accessible, consumable way of viewing content. So we'll be building that out a lot too. And I would say just scaling up the frequency of content as well.
Cool. So making more snackable.
Yeah, kind of more like on both ends of the spectrum. Like, we're right now, our day-to-day content is in the middle. We're trying to figure out what are these big moments that we can capitalize on, and what are these smaller moments we can capitalize on. So,
and just overall as a business, what would you say you're trying to get better at? Where do you kind of, as you kind of give yourself, coming up to the end of the year, thinking, being reflective, having some introspection.
Yeah.
What are you trying to get better at?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, we're always trying to get better at our internal processes, so we work on that in the background. That's not super exciting for people, but it's a really necessary part of our growth. We're trying to get better at expanding the type of stuff that we talk about, because right now, just compared to other places that publish 200-300 articles a day, sometimes, like in a Business Insider sense, like, we publish 1 or 2 things a day right now, and there's only so much we can talk about. So we're leaving a lot unexplained and a lot unsaid right now. And if we genuinely believe that we're explaining things to people in a way that makes their lives better, then we should continue doing that and do more of that. And, you know, trust in media continues to fall. I saw a Gallup poll yesterday that said 49% of people either think that the media is not trustworthy at all or is not very trustworthy. So that's half the population, and that trend is continuing to fall. And if that's the case, then where are people going to get their information from, right? If and you know, if we can be that source for people where they can learn about the world and make better decisions around money and their career in that, then it's our obligation to keep growing and doing that. So that's really where we're focused.
Awesome. Well, let's finish off with a lightning round. I'm curious, what is the best advice that you've ever received?
Yeah, I wish I had a good example there, but honestly, people say, you know, be really selective about what you do. So just saying no as a default is pretty good advice so far. And really, if something's going to get your attention, let it win your attention. Don't just make that the default, right?
And which of your personal habits do you think has contributed most to your success?
I'm bad at a lot of things, but one thing I'm really good at it is working really, really hard at things that most people would look at and go, "Nah, I'm not going to touch that."
Can you share an internet resource or tool that you use nearly every day?
Yeah, there's a few things. One thing I use right now is sort of like so the big thing for me is I need information and I need to know what's going on, and I need that to be the most data dense, compact thing that I can find, right? And so what I use is something called Feedly, and I integrate Pocket, which is like Firefox's sort of recommendation engine, and I plug that in, and that's my dashboard of everything that was published that day. I also know exactly where to go on Reddit to look at stuff. I know the Hacker News, so I've got like a really really quick circuit that I hit every day to know exactly what's coming out. And so those are sort of the things I use a lot. Um, yeah, that's amazing. Outline.com is super useful for like we can't until there's a universal paywall, which would be amazing. You can't have a subscription to every single media site in the world. So outline.com will just like rip that and turn it into a little non-paywalled article for you. So use that a lot.
What book would you recommend and why? You can give a shout out for your own if you want.
um, sorry, what would I recommend for? Oh, a book. Yeah, yeah. Man, there's a lot of books, but I actually just finished reading one called How Money Became Dangerous by Christopher Varelis. And so that one's really interesting. It talks about how, so this guy worked on Wall Street from the 80s up till now, doing like merger and acquisition and all these different things. And it talks about how finance used to be pretty simple and how it just got more and more complex to the point where people just don't understand it anymore. And they don't understand the way that finance interacts with the day-to-day economy anymore. And there's a lot of really interesting personal anecdotes. The guy's had some pretty wild experiences over the years. So it's a kind of like a insider's view of like Wall Street and all these different things that were happening. Really cool book.
Cool. What is one piece of advice you'd give to someone at the beginning of their digital media journey? Someone who's thinking, hey, I want to create interesting, compelling, engaging content. What is one piece of advice that you give them?
Yeah, I would say if you're genuinely looking to create a media company, and you don't necessarily need to do that. There's a ton of people out there who are just like making a run at it on Instagram or something. And you know, if they're able to parlay that into something, then you know, good for you, power to you. There's so many talented people out there right now. But if you're looking to start a media company, you need to look at like what is driving you to want to create that. So I know that when we were looking at Visual Capitalist and as we started pivoting to more of a media bundle, it was about satisfying holes in the market. Really, I know for me, I personally really liked things like when New York Times, for example, like they have Upshot when they would do a cool data viz, or Economist Chart of the Week was like an early example of that, or South China Morning Post too has been doing infographics for years that are really amazing. A lot of people probably don't even know about. And I would look at that and go, damn, why can't all the news be like that? And so I don't know, we're trying to make all the news like that. And if there's something like that for other people out there that go like, I wish that media was more like this, then find out what your this is, and hope that you also are good at making it like that. So that'd be the thing, is really tap into the why. What was going to motivate you? Because like it's a grind. Anyone who's a journalist will tell you, anybody in media will tell you, it's a real grind. It's hard. There's a lot of information every day, so you really need the conviction to do it. If you're pursuing it for a reason that's other than your own conviction and interest, you're just going to get burnt out and go, hell no, I'm not going to do this anymore.
Cool. Well, Nick, thanks so much for joining us today. Where can people find out more about you and what you're up to?
Yeah, I mean, just looking at visualcapitalist.com is a good way to find out what I'm up to, because that's what I'm doing most of the time. But yeah, if you want to talk to me personally, I'm really easy to reach. Vanix on Twitter, so PHANYXX. That's the easiest place to just strike up a conversation if you want to do that.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been great having you with us. And if you like what you heard, please subscribe and stay in touch on indiemedia.club. But until next time, thanks so much for listening.